I still remember the weight of that folder in my hands. A simple leather folder worn at the edges, but inside it lay the copy of my grandfather's will with a bright red notary stamp. The ink had faded slightly over the years, but it was still clear his estate, valued at more than $2 million, was supposed to be shared equally. I held it tight under the linen-covered table that evening, trying to steady my breathing. The occasion was supposed to be joyful, my younger cousin's graduation party held in a lavish country club just outside the city. Waiters carried trays of champagne flutes, strings of golden lights glimmered across the ballroom, and polished shoes clicked over marble floors. Everyone was smiling, laughing, raising glasses in honor of new beginnings. Everyone except me. It happened suddenly, without warning. My uncle leaned close, his cologne heavy, his smile sharp. His words sliced through the music and laughter like broken glass. "Good thing you're not the one on stage tonight. Weak blood like you doesn't deserve a single dollar from Grandpa's estate." I froze. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him, but the smirk on his face told me otherwise. My chest tightened. The blood drained from my face. Around me, my family raised their glasses, clinking crystal together as though celebrating my humiliation. The strange thing was, no one looked at me. Not a single head turned. It was as if I didn't exist. The crowd roared with laughter, but not at a joke at me, or at least at the idea of me. That was the moment when shock burned into something else, a cold loneliness. I sat perfectly still, staring at the flickering candle on the centerpiece, pretending I hadn't heard. But the words lingered in my ear, repeating themselves: weak blood, undeserving estate. I had lived with subtle insults before, but never so blunt, never so public. I wanted to scream, to slam my glass down, to show them the folder in my hands, and remind them that I was not invisible. Instead, I pressed the folder tighter against my lap, my knuckles pale. The surface of the folder was smooth, almost slick with the sweat from my palms. The party carried on. Toasts were made. My cousin gave a speech. Everyone applauded as if nothing had happened. I forced a smile, nodding at people who didn't bother looking back. Fake warmth, fake interest, all layered over the truth. I was an outsider at my own family's celebration. But what they didn't know was this: the folder I carried was not just paper. It was proof, the kind of proof that could unravel everything they had tried to build without me. I'll explain in a moment. For now, let me say this: humiliation leaves a scar deeper than betrayal. When your own family tells you to your face in public that you are worth nothing, it carves a line across your soul. And sometimes that line becomes the path you walk toward revenge. So let me ask you, have you ever been pushed aside by your own family over money or inheritance? Tell me where you're watching from and hit subscribe. We need to talk about families and money. I grew up in the same family that toasted each other that night, the same family that pretended I wasn't there. To outsiders, we looked polished and respectable. My father ran a small consulting firm, my mother kept the household in order, and my siblings excelled in school. But behind closed doors, the picture wasn't so flattering. From the time I was young, it was clear who the stars of the family were. My older brother could do no wrong: his grades, his charm, his effortless ability to win people over. My younger sister was the golden child, endlessly praised for her looks and her grace. I was the one in the middle, neither brilliant nor adored, the filler between two shining lights. It wasn't just subtle comparisons. It was spoken aloud at dinners, at holidays, at gatherings where relatives filled the room with the scent of roast turkey or glazed ham. "Why can't you be more like him? She's the pride of this family." Each word chipped away at me. I learned early on that silence was safer than protest. I still remember a Christmas Eve when I was 15. I had saved up from a part-time job to buy gifts: scarves for my parents, a watch for my brother, a book my sister had wanted. The gifts were modest, wrapped in newspaper, because I couldn't afford fancy paper. When they opened them, there were polite smiles, but no warmth. Then my brother unwrapped a new laptop from my parents, and the room lit up with joy. My gift became invisible. I became invisible. Those early years planted seeds. Seeds of bitterness, but also of endurance. I started saving, working harder, studying quietly while others celebrated. When I landed a job in financial consulting, I thought things might change. Surely bringing in steady money, paying my own way, building a future, surely that would earn me respect. But money in this family was not about effort. It was about legacy, about inheritance, about who was chosen. My grandfather was the only one who treated me differently. He would take me aside during family barbecues, press a weathered hand on my shoulder, and say, "Don't let them write your story for you." He never said more, but the look in his eyes told me he understood. When he passed away, I mourned him more than anyone else. I wasn't invited into the conversations about his estate. I wasn't consulted when lawyers met with my father and uncle. I was told to focus on work and stay out of the heavy matters. But I wasn't blind. I knew something valuable was being kept from me. My instincts whispered of hidden savings properties, assets I had never heard about. Years later, when I finally stumbled upon that folder, my suspicions hardened into fact. My grandfather had left behind more than just his words. He had left behind a will that named me among his heirs. A share of the estate valued at over $2 million and partial ownership in a small but steady business. And yet my family had moved forward as if I didn't exist. They lived in the house my grandfather had built, hosted parties on the deck he once loved while I sat in the background. They had locked me out not just of property, but of belonging. So I buried the old wounds deep, worked my job, paid my bills, nodded politely at family dinners, but inside I carried the folder. And inside I carried every whispered slight, every laugh at my expense, every time they erased me from the picture. Because humiliation, repeated often enough, does not fade, it calcifies. And one day it cracks. The folder in my hands at that graduation party wasn't the first hint. The truth is, the cracks had been showing for years, only I had chosen to ignore them. Looking back, I realized my family had been rewriting history in slow motion, covering their tracks with polite smiles and well-rehearsed lies. It began with an email. I was at my office late one night, combing through quarterly reports when my father's name popped up on my screen. He had accidentally sent me a message meant for someone else, our family's longtime attorney. The subject line was plain, but the body of the email chilled me. Make sure the adjustments exclude Jordan. They'll never fight it. Too weak, too distracted. I stared at the screen for a long time, the words burning into me. Adjustments. Exclude. Weak. He wasn't even subtle. My own father instructing a lawyer to erase me from something I was never even supposed to know about. That night, I printed the email and slipped it into the same folder that already held my grandfather's will. It felt strange, almost illegal, sliding those pages together. But deep down, I knew it was necessary. Evidence doesn't just speak, it protects. Still, part of me wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. Families don't just cut out their own, do they? But the signs kept multiplying. At a Sunday dinner, not long after, I excused myself to wash my hands. Passing by the den, I caught voices low and hurried. My uncle's words were sharp. We can't let Jordan get wind of this. If they knew about the estate, they'd make trouble. My father grunted his agreement. The clink of whiskey glasses punctuated their plan. I froze in the hallway, the sound of the faucet running in the empty bathroom covering my absence. That's when I understood it wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. The final blow came from technology, as it so often does in our age. My sister, careless with her phone, had her group chat preview light up while we sat side by side on the couch. I hadn't meant to look, but how could I not when my name was staring at me in bold letters? Jordan's dead weight. Always has been. Thank God we can fix the will before they find out. There it was written plain in digital ink with laughing emojis trailing after it. My siblings, my parents, even cousins I had once shared summer nights with at my grandfather's lake house mocking me, dismissing me, erasing me in real time. I said nothing. I smiled when they smiled, nodded when they nodded. But inside, something was shifting. You see, betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it leaks through the cracks of an email, a half-heard conversation, a glowing text message. And when it builds up enough, it no longer feels like water. It feels like fire. That fire burned quietly inside me as I added each new scrap of evidence to my folder, the email, the overheard words, the screenshot of that group chat. The folder grew heavier, not with paper, but with the weight of truth. They thought I was too weak, too distracted, too invisible to notice. But what they didn't know was this. I had already begun to see them clearly for the first time. And I was waiting. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about family, about gratitude, about gathering around a table heavy with food and lighter, if only for a day, with burdens. But that year for me, it was a stage built for humiliation. The house was my grandfather's, though. Few seemed to remember. His lake house had once been a place where cousins ran wild through the woods, where bonfires cracked under the night sky, where he sat in his old rocking chair telling stories. Now, my parents claimed it as if it had always been theirs, hosting a dinner with silver platters and fine china, as though legacy could be polished into truth. I arrived with a bottle of wine I knew no one would drink. They never drank what I brought. It was a silent ritual of dismissal. I walked in, folder tucked under my arm, greeted with half smiles and glances that slid past me like I was furniture. The dining room had two tables that night. The main table glowed with candles and crystal, every seat reserved with little handwritten cards. For the successful, that's what my sister called it when she thought I was out of earshot. Then there was the smaller table shoved near the sliding doors, drafty and close to the trash bin. Plastic cups, paper napkins, no candles. When I asked where I should sit, my cousin laughed, pointing at the smaller table. Sorry, Jordan, this table's for the real ones. You know, people who've made something of themselves. The room erupted in laughter. It wasn't just one or two, it was everyone. My father chuckled low. My mother smiled faintly, saying nothing. My siblings clinked their glasses, raising toasts I couldn't hear over the pounding in my ears. I sat down at that small table, alone. The smell of the trash bin carried over, sharp and sour. The clatter of plates filled the silence around me. My hands rested on the folder in my lap, fingertips tracing the edges. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm, but rage has a way of coiling tight in your chest until it finds a way out. What none of them realized was that their cruelty wasn't private anymore. Someone, maybe one of the younger cousins, maybe a friend, filmed the scene on their phone. They caught the moment my cousin pointed, the laughter, the smug grins, the isolation. Within hours, the clip was online. By morning, it was viral. The caption read, "Family of millionaires mocks their own at Thanksgiving." Comments flooded in, strangers furious on my behalf. They didn't know me, but they recognized cruelty when they saw it. And yet, in that moment, sitting at the smaller table, I wasn't thinking about the internet. I wasn't thinking about strangers. I was thinking about my grandfather, about his voice telling me not to let them write my story. I thought about the folder heavy in my hands, and about the way truth had a way of waiting patiently until the right moment to speak. I sat there through the meal, untouched turkey cooling on my plate, their laughter ringing in my ears. Every insult, every dismissal, every look that cut me down layer upon layer, pressing me deeper into the chair. But what they didn't know was this humiliation can be fuel. And that night I decided it would be. Christmas came sooner than I expected. The decorations went up across town, lights twinkling on rooftops, stores playing the same songs on repeat. My family, of course, planned a grand dinner at the lake house again. This time the invitation felt less like an invite and more like an order. "Be there," my mother said over the phone, her tone sharp. "It's Christmas. Don't make a scene." I laughed quietly to myself after hanging up. Don't make a scene. That was rich considering what they had done to me on Thanksgiving. Still I went. But I didn't go empty-handed. The folder was heavier now, swollen with more than just my grandfather's will. Inside were printed copies of the email, the overheard notes I had written down, screenshots of the family group chat. Each piece of paper felt like a blade waiting to be unsheathed. The house glittered with garlands and the scent of pine. Laughter echoed from the living room where glasses clinked and relatives mingled. I kept to the corner at first, watching, listening, collecting the small cruelties they handed out as naturally as breath. A cousin mocking my job. An aunt whispering about how I had no ambition. My father pretending I wasn't standing 5 feet away when someone asked how many children he had. Dinner was served, and once again the room divided into two tables. I didn't argue this time. I simply carried my plate to the smaller one, setting the folder down beside it. I could feel eyes on me, whispers chasing the movement. They didn't know what was coming. When the plates were nearly empty and the wine nearly gone, I stood. The room quieted, not out of respect, but out of curiosity. They wanted to see what kind of spectacle I would make. "I've been quiet long enough," I said, my voice steady, though inside my heart hammered against my ribs. I lifted the folder, placing it on the table with a heavy thud. "But since you've all made it clear where I stand in this family, let me return the favor with the truth." I pulled out the first sheet, my grandfather's will. The notary stamp glinted in the candlelight. Gasps rippled through the room as I read aloud word for word, the lines that included my name among the heirs, granting me a share of his estate valued at over $2 million in ownership in the small business he had built from nothing. Faces shifted. My uncle's jaw tightened. My sister's smile faltered. My father looked down at his hands as though the tablecloth held the answer he couldn't face. But I wasn't finished. I unfolded the printed email, my father's own words staring back at him. "Make sure the adjustments exclude Jordan. They'll never fight it. Too weak, too distracted." The silence in the room was suffocating. Finally, I held up the screenshot of the group chat, their digital laughter immortalized. "Dead weight," I read. Always has been. Thank God we can fix the will before they find out. I let the words hang in the air, each one a nail hammered into the coffin of their pretense. For the first time in years, no one laughed. No one raised a glass. No one dismissed me with a wave of the hand. They sat in their chairs, rigid, pale eyes darting from me to one another as if searching for an escape. It was the smallest taste of justice, but it was enough to make the air shift. The balance had tilted. And though I didn't say it aloud, I knew this was only the beginning. After Christmas night, the family retreated into silence. Not the comfortable kind that follows forgiveness, but the brittle kind that cracks under its own weight. Phone calls stopped. Group chats went dead. When I drove by the lake house a week later, the driveway was empty, shutters closed tight. They were hiding or plotting, maybe both. I thought I was alone in what came next. Alone with my folder, my anger, my resolve. But then the call came. It was from my aunt, my father's younger sister. We hadn't spoken in years. She had always been the quiet one at family gatherings, offering polite smiles but rarely stepping into the storm. She lived out of state, and when she stopped attending holidays, no one explained why. Now her voice carried a sharp edge I had never heard before. "I saw the video," she said. "The one from Thanksgiving. And then I heard what you read on Christmas. I think it's time we talked." We met in a small cafe downtown. She slid into the booth across from me, her eyes clear, her hands steady around a cup of coffee. "You're not the first they've done this to," she said. My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a slim folder thinner than mine, but just as heavy in meaning. Inside were letters, old financial documents, her own copy of my grandfather's words. He had intended for her to inherit a portion too modest compared to mine, but significant enough. And just like with me, she had been erased. "They cut me out quietly," she said, her lips pressed tight. "I didn't have the strength to fight then. But watching you stand up at Christmas, I realized I'm done being silent." For the first time, I didn't feel like I was shouting into the wind. I had an ally, someone who knew the sting of betrayal, who carried her own scars. Together, we pored over the documents. My folder and hers fit together like puzzle pieces, forming a story far uglier than either of us had imagined. It wasn't just about favoritism or cruelty. It was deliberate theft, systematic erasure. We took the evidence to a lawyer, a friend of hers from years past, a man with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He flipped through the pages, slowly nodding, grunting, pausing when the weight of proof became undeniable. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "You have a case," he said. "A strong one. And judging by the video that's already spread, you also have public opinion on your side. If they thought they could bury this, they were wrong." Walking out of that office folder tucked under my arm once more, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: power. Not the kind that comes from money or status, but the power of truth, the kind my grandfather had told me to hold on to. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, snow falling gently outside the window. I thought about the path ahead, the lawyers, the courtrooms, the inevitable headlines. For the first time, the prospect didn't scare me. Because I wasn't invisible anymore. And I wasn't alone. By February, the case was filed. The words looked almost unreal on official paper: estate dispute plaintiffs Jordan and Aunt Claire versus the family trust. Seeing my name in black ink on a legal document felt like both a wound and a weapon. The news spread faster than I could have imagined. Local papers picked up the story first: family torn apart over $2 million estate. Within a week, larger outlets grabbed it, splashing headlines about betrayal, lawsuits, and money. But what truly lit the fire was the internet. Someone had leaked the group chat screenshots I had presented on Christmas. The phrase "weak blood doesn't deserve millions" became a rallying cry online. Strangers who had never heard of me were suddenly in my corner. Hashtags spread. Comments poured in, thousands of voices calling out the cruelty. Some defended my family, saying every inheritance story is messy. But most saw what I had lived with for decades: humiliation disguised as tradition. The first day in court was like walking into a theater where everyone already knew the plot. My parents and siblings sat on one side, stiff in their suits, eyes forward. They refused to look at me. My father's face was stone, but his hands betrayed him, fingers twitching against the table. My sister whispered furiously to our lawyer, her cheeks flushed with a red that was not just embarrassment but rage. Across the aisle, my aunt and I sat together, documents neatly stacked, our lawyer calm and deliberate. He opened with the will clear and notarized. Then came the email, my father's words read aloud, each syllable echoing in the courtroom. Gasps rose from the benches where reporters sat scribbling furiously. My family's attorney tried to argue it was all a misunderstanding. Clerical adjustments, he called them. Necessary reallocations. But when the judge asked why those adjustments conveniently erased two rightful heirs, his arguments fell flat. Then came the video. Thanksgiving night, me being pointed to the small table, laughter circling around me like vultures. The clip played on a screen for the whole room to see. My cousin's smug face, my forced smile, the sound of everyone laughing, it filled the silence like a confession none of them had meant to give. By the second week, the trial had become a spectacle. Cameras outside the courthouse, journalists shouting questions, strangers cheering me on when I walked in. It was surreal. I had lived invisible for so long that visibility felt like sunlight after years underground. Inside, my family cracked under the pressure. My brother lashed out at a reporter, caught on video yelling Jordan was never worth anything anyway. That clip spread online, fueling the outrage. My mother tried tears on the stand, speaking of sacrifices and misunderstandings, but the documents in my folder cut through her words like knives. Every day, more evidence piled on. Every night, I went home exhausted but determined. My aunt kept me steady, reminding me that justice wasn't about revenge alone, it was about reclaiming what had been stolen. And through it all, I thought of my grandfather. I imagined him sitting in his rocking chair watching the storm unfold, nodding as if to say, "This is the story you were meant to tell." When the final arguments closed, the judge's words were clear, the will stood as written. My name restored, my share recognized, the attempt to erase me condemned. The courtroom erupted, some in relief, some in fury. My father slumped in his chair. My siblings stormed out before the judge had even finished. Reporters swarmed, flashes, blinding microphones shoved forward. But in that noise, in that chaos, I felt something quiet inside me. Not triumph, exactly, not joy. Something steadier. Vindication. The verdict echoed long after the courtroom emptied. For weeks I carried the words in my chest, like a shield, my name restored, my inheritance secured. It wasn't just about the money, though. $2 million is no small number. It was about finally being seen, finally being acknowledged after a lifetime of being erased. The family fractured almost overnight. My father stopped returning calls from anyone outside his tight circle. My mother retreated into silence, posting vague messages on social media about betrayal and disloyalty, each one met with comments reminding her of the truth she couldn't hide. My siblings scattered, one moved across the country, another shut down their online accounts after the backlash became unbearable. The lake house, once the crown jewel of our gatherings, stood empty. Reporters sometimes drove past, snapping photos of the shuttered windows. The rusting swing set the deck where my grandfather once told stories. The house felt like a ghost, not of him, but of the family that had destroyed itself, chasing what he left behind. For me, life changed in quieter ways. I met with the lawyers to finalize the transfer of assets. I visited the small business my grandfather had left, shares and shaking hands with the employees who remembered him fondly. They told me stories I had never heard, how he slipped money to workers when their children were sick, how he stayed late to fix problems others would have left behind. Those stories reminded me why he had chosen to include me in his will. Not because I was the loudest or the most celebrated, but because he saw something steady in me. My aunt and I grew closer. We shared dinners, sometimes laughing about the absurdity of what had happened, other times sitting in silence, simply grateful not to be alone anymore. She told me once, winning doesn't erase the scars, but it makes them easier to bear. She was right. And yet, even with victory in hand, I found myself reflecting. Revenge, as satisfying as it felt in those heated moments, didn't undo the years of cruelty. It didn't erase the Christmas mornings where my gifts were ignored, the family dinners where my chair was an afterthought, the nights I lay awake, wondering why I wasn't enough. But what it did give me was a chance to choose differently. I chose to build a life outside their shadow. I chose to take my inheritance not as a weapon but as a foundation. I invested part of it, secured a home of my own, and set aside funds for something my grandfather would have been proud of, a scholarship for students overlooked the way I had been. Closure isn't neat. It isn't a ribbon tied around old wounds. It's the quiet understanding that you survived, and that survival itself is a form of victory. As I sit here now, folder finally empty, documents tucked away in a safe where they can gather dust, I can still hear my grandfather's voice. Don't let them write your story for you. This at last is my story. If you believe I made the right choice, comment right. If you would have taken revenge in another way, share your idea, I want to hear it.